If you ask someone on the street, for whatever reason, to name a character in Greek mythology, after initial confusion, they're probably going to say one of the gods. I mean, that's not unusual. A lot of movies and books feature these characters heavily, and for good reason. Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades are powerful, immortal, and filmed very well. If you need proof, look no further than the underrated 1997 Disney film Hercules, a true hidden gem. If you said to name a regular person, they probably wonder why you're still doing this. But if they played along, you might get Achilles, Odysseus, or maybe Andromeda. All names so far you've probably heard before in either movie, show, or just science. These are just background characters playing their roles in lands of gods. Daedalus was a master craftsman and architect. Don't know the name? Well, he's the guy that built the wings for his son Icarus and designed a labyrinth to hold the Minotaur. You probably know the basic beats of those stories. Flew too close to the sun and the wings melted. Queen was cursed to fall in love with the bull and had its child. Tales as old as time. Sometimes, though, fables and legends, well, they have a way of repeating. It's early 90s in a Miami suburb roughly around here, where we meet Vince Perry. His son, Vince Perry Jr., is playing a new video game that's driving his friends crazy. Told by the dad himself. I happened to see my son playing a legal product made in Taiwan that had 40 games on it. The whole neighborhood went crazy over it. Vince was right about one thing. The item was in fact an illegal multi-cart. Now I don't think the state will prosecute you for owning this game, but saying I own an illegal product to a reporter seems like a door I wouldn't want to open. This wasn't something you're going to see in Nintendo Power though. Multi-carts typically ran poorly and crammed in dozens of games for the price of one, using a business trick I like to call breaking the law. Normally in the 80s and 90s, you're buying these at the places outside the gaze of the law. The kinds of markets where you get some knockoff Disney merch and TV shows recorded at home on VHS. Real questionable hangouts. Times sure do change. Now this is where we introduce the main character. Other people will come and go, but this is a story about a man. Vince Perry. Born in 1942, Mr. Perry was an investment banker living in Miami by way of Brooklyn. At this point in the story, he's a business owner. He spent the last 4 years helping businesses become more profitable, and he was good at his job. He saw this multi-cart and thought to himself, what if I did it right? Mario Gonzalez was born in Key West, Florida, and grew up with a creative streak. Piano lessons as a preteen, and eventually programming on Atari 400. His family would leave Key West though and end up in Miami. He was working part-time as a sound engineer. Mario overheard Vince tell some people about a game his kid got at the flea market. Realizing his chance, Mario approached Vince and gave his pitch, but Vince wanted a proof of concept. Conveniently, Mr. Gonzalez and his friends were into making games. Mario assembled the team. He got his friends Albert and Javi. Then they set out to make the proof. What they created was a clone of Tetris called Megatris. Now the only game I could find was the DOS version from 1996, and theirs was for the Amiga. It's not the same game, but it is a Tetris clone. Really can't be that hard to imagine what it looked like. After that though, they got back with Vince. Apparently he was so impressed he hired them on the spot to make his game. Albert knew they didn't have the knowledge to program the NES game though. They were talented programmers, but the Amiga and the NES required different skills, so these guys need to be taught. Vince realized this. He sent the young developers, his new team, to Salt Lake City. With modern coding boot camps, they say you can learn a new language in about 3 to 4 months. At least enough to know how it works. A few people I've talked to said it would take about 6 months to feel comfortable enough to know the basics, and at least a full year before you could work on any kind of retail project. These men didn't have that time though. They only had 1 week of training. With that training, they learned how to make the framing for a game. Using a pretty efficient strategy, Albert and Mario decided all of the games would use the same basic frame. Some values would be changed, like movement, but this would let them have basic consistent starting point. Albert described it as tweaking the knobs. That way you just copy and paste as much as possible. When Albert loaded the code in the machine for the first time, nothing came up. He worked with a friend of Vince to get the code running, but realized this device wasn't going to do what the team wanted. Like an airplane that was too heavy to take off, they're going to have to start cutting weight, tweaking code, taking out chunks that weren't necessary, and anything else to get this behemoth airborne. This was the first indicator that the wings they had just weren't strong enough to lift poor Icarus, but they just kept trying. Originally, there wasn't a lot of talk about deadlines. Once contracts were signed, Mario said he realized things are going to move fast. There were, after all, investors. In a Miami Herald article, Vince secured investments from Saudi Arabia and Europe, $5 million worth, nearly $10 million today. Those people, well, they're going to want to see returns on our investments sooner than later. In an interview with Arcade Attack, Mario said, "We still spent countless hours at the music studio, now converted to a game design studio, and got very little sleep while surviving on coffee and donuts. The music portion was most difficult. I had to compose each song on external equipment, dump the music into data, and then manually input the data into the programming." They did it though. Around here was when Developer 4 joined the team. The reason I'm calling Developer 4 is because we actually don't know his name. It's never publicly released. We do know some things about his time there though. He remembers coming to hang out with the guys while they worked. They started just visiting and bringing food, to eventually learning and contributing sporadically. Eventually joining the team and working on things like backgrounds. Once you're near the game, it was impossible to resist apparently. No one ever has to get lost in a labyrinth. It just happens. There was another developer described by everyone as Vince 2. He apparently didn't contribute much besides the menu. He originally told the guys they worked on a classic game. Albert recalls it was something like Galaga or Galaxian. He described him as a man that would exaggerate stories to make himself look cool though. The menu he made was just a copy of Vince's son's bootleg. Even then there was a chance he didn't do it himself. Albert said Kronos Engineering taught him how the menu system worked, so they may have done some of the heavy lifting for him. In the same story though, Albert remembered Vince Perry being unhappy with how slow Vince 2 was. He said one day he heard Mr. Perry on a phone call with his lawyer. "I want you to send someone over to talk to this guy. No, don't hurt him. Just scare him a bit." To be fair, he only heard one half of the conversation. And Mario did say Vince Perry was a great motivator. At this point, things were starting to fall apart more than before. The intro was added, but contained a sample from Rob Bass and DJ Easy Rock's It Takes Two. No one paid for the use of the song, and no one actually remembers who suggested and implemented it. It was just there one day. They just hoped that no one associated with Rob Bass would complain, that it was a small enough sample that no one would notice. Where's all this happening though? Well, it's happening here. Since it was a former recording studio, the walls were soundproof and padded, with no windows to the outside. Now imagine putting a handful of people inside there for hours a day, because Albert said they would have 3 to 5 people working at once. Their desks weren't actual desks though, they're just 2x4s with plywood on top that Vince had made. In the middle of the room was a beanbag chair. No one was sure who brought it, and no one cared. Albert was especially thankful for it. That lone beanbag chair was used as a makeshift bed when people stayed the night working, which was apparently common. At one point they were working 20 hours a day for 3 or 4 days in a row. Sometimes they had visitors. Vince would be there filling the small room with smoke and ashing on the carpet, rubbing it in with his shoes. Albert remembered seeing that and thinking that he was dumping cigarettes on his bed. As Daedalus built the labyrinth, so too did Vince. His Minotaur, though, was Action 52, and these people were trapped with it. The writing was on the wall, though. Mario knew it wasn't going to work. There was no possible way, given the time limitations, that we could have designed 52 games without limiting the levels down to 2 or 3 per game. In that sense, I don't believe any game with 2 or 3 levels could become a success. A man named Mikey would spend time there, and he tried playing one of their games, slashers. One thing you need to know about Mikey is that he was legally blind and had almost no vision. To their complete surprise, he beat it. When asked how, Mikey said all he did was hold right and keep mashing the attack button. Albert got a sinking feeling. This is the first time he knew that they were in trouble. There was no testing done. There were no quality checks. This wasn't the assembly of a house. It was constructing a shelter in a storm. You're not worrying about windows and lighting. You just need to keep the water from soaking you. just to ride everything out long enough to reach the other side. You tie sticks together in the dark, hoping your sacrifice would appease the gods, that someone or something on high would see your plight and show mercy. One morning, though, Vince got paranoid and decided he needed to secure the code. According to Albert, he wasn't sure what Vince ran. That doesn't matter, though. What does matter is the computer's file table is deleted. The part that lets you know what files are and how they connect with each other. The source code was gone. The team scrambled and spent weeks trying to rescue the code, but couldn't. You need the original source code to copyright something. The fragments and pieces they have wouldn't be enough. But the bigger problem looming over them was that the game wasn't even finished yet. All they could do was take the chips and give them to Vince. The chips they gave him were the testers that they burned to see how the game ran. They weren't finished, but it was the closest they would come. Vince took the chips to Kronos Engineering and they would extract and publish the results. Action 52. The product was finished. They were done. They escaped the labyrinth, but so did the Minotaur. In the end, developer Forrest stated he was paid $1,500 for 3 months of work. He had to ask Vince for it directly. He wasn't sure what, if anything, the other guys got paid. We only have his word to go off of, though. So the game is as finished as it's going to be, and we still haven't talked about the headliner itself. Now let's visualize these games. Now if you didn't play a single game and bought your entertainment in bulk like Costco, this looks like an amazing deal. 1 game a week for an entire year? Too good to be true. Well, it was. The best way you can describe it is probably the same way Albert does. What he really ended up doing was making 52 lame Atari games on a second generation console. You see, these guys grew up in the Atari era, so essentially these are just as complex Atari games. Lots of games just reuse the same sounds. A few games just copied assets wholesale from another one. Beeps and Blips. Well, that's a clone of They Came. They did add the feature of being unbeatable due to bugs though. Now we're not going to go over each one, be it platformers, space games, a multiplayer dragon game, and a few that you can just call others, because I'm not even sure what to classify them as. Neither does the manual though. Jigsaw, which 100% sounds like a jigsaw puzzle game, it's actually a platformer involving power tools. Crazy Shuffle is an educational puzzle game? Nope. You shoot things in the maze. Is Manchester Beat a rhythm game where you fight animals? Come on. You know it's not. There were some glitches, obviously. In Star Evil, if you use a turbo controller and just keep shooting, enemies will never appear. Jigsaw and Alfredo, they couldn't even be started. Selecting them would just crash the game. How did Vince fix this? Well, he put a piece of paper in the game that said beating Ooze will unlock these games. What happens when you beat Ooze and the games don't unlock? Well, you couldn't beat Ooze. Oh well. By the way, remember this for later. It will come up again. One cute story before we go back is that Bubblegum Rossi is named after Mario's girlfriend Rosie because she loved bubblegum. They're married now. You see, there are happy stories around this game. You just have to look for them. So clearly Action 52 had its own plethora of issues. Not just in the game, but outside of it as well. First of all, it wasn't licensed. Nintendo wasn't putting their seal of approval anywhere on this game. Secondly, the suggested retail price was $199. This is the same price you'd pay for a brand new Super Nintendo that came with Super Mario World. If you want all of the game manuals, you need to send cash, in an envelope, out of the country and to the Bahamas. At $2 a pop, you're paying $104 for every manual. I searched all over archives, Usenet, forums, and manual collections. I couldn't find anyone posting their Action 52 booklet collection. I can just assume that either no one ordered them or no one received them. With how simplistic the games were, I can't imagine you'd need them though. While researching, I did see people talk about when the game came out. Wikipedia states the NES version came out in 1991. The date also shows on places like Moby Games and Game FAQs. I mean, Moby Games also has Vince Perry as an artist for the PS5 version of Spider-Man 2. I don't think that's correct either. So these sources aren't infallible. We can narrow down this release date though. Supervision 52-1 came out in 1989. This is important because Action 52 uses its menu in-game. In a post from Albert, he says during development they listened to a variety of music. One of those albums is pretty interesting though, Bugs Bunny on Broadway, which came out in January of 1991. So we know they were for sure working on the game during that year. In a forum post though, Albert gives a solid time frame. He said that they worked 18 months on the project. Well, that would push the game sometime in the mid-1992. If only we could find some printed information. In the May 1992 issue of GamePro magazine, they did a feature on Action 52. In this issue, they go over what Action 52 is, how much it cost, and most importantly, the release window. Well, would you look at that? I've gone through every single GamePro from 1991 through 1993. This is the only mention of a release date. It lines up with Albert's timeline and the Bugs Bunny album, so Action 52 most likely came out May of 1992. Interestingly enough, in Game Informer magazine, from the March and April issue of 1993, Action 52 is shown at Winter CES with the release date of 1993. I kind of think the 1992 date though is the correct one, because by November of that year, it was already being sold for half off. Does that mean they took an already completed game to CES and said it was coming next year to get more attention? Who knows? Does this new date change anything though? No, but it gives you an idea of where we are and why I'm referencing that going forward. Because Vince, like Daedalus before him, wanted to create something. He wanted to create an empire, and he didn't have a lot of time to do it. This is the most complete list of products Active was working on. It was a list of everything that was planned for 1993 and beyond. On here was Action 52, obviously. It also included Action 52 for the Sega Genesis or the Mega Drive, depending on where you're from. During that same Winter CES in 1992, it was shown on the show floor for June 1993 release. It was also heavily advertised in UK's Mega magazine. This version is pretty mysterious though. It was created by Farsight Technologies, but it's unknown how much they themselves created because this game is very different. The best I could find looking for information was an article from 20 years ago. Someone reached out to the company asking them for details. What they got back was an all caps message. Why do you want to know this? Now I did reach out to the guy that was in charge of the studio back then hoping for a response. I haven't heard back yet and I probably won't. The former studio head of the company that made the Sega version of Action 52? Well, that's Jay Obernolte, and he's busy. He's busy being an active United States congressman. Someone who has actively touched Action 52 was elected to serve in Washington, D.C. The world is so interesting sometimes. Albert also thinks these people at Farsight made the next entry, Cheetah Men 2. We only know this game exists because years after our story will end, a man named Mike Elter will stumble across them in the Miami warehouse. Supposedly they're created and abandoned because by the time they'd be released in 1993, the Super Nintendo and Genesis were the current consoles. So instead of paying the manufacturer, Vince allegedly let them sit in the warehouse. Things just kept piling up. There was a contest for the 5th title in Action 52, Ooze. Remember Ooze? Once you beat level 5, a code would appear on screen. Take a picture, mail it in, and you can win $102,000. Remember how the game crashed after level 2? Well, no one was able to win the contest. Luckily, it was fixed in time for Revision 2, but by then the contest was over. What crazy timing. Eventually people would be able to use emulators to see what the screen would have looked like. Sometime during the Action 52 project, Vince got in contact with Prodigy. Vince was going to make them a cartridge with a keyboard and modem. The plan was to get a cartridge from Nintendo that would connect to their online services. Documentation was shared with the team. Sadly, this fell through. As far as I can tell, this would have made the Nintendo one of the first consoles to ever connect to the internet. It started to feel like Vince was building a second Labyrinth. The Minotaur escaped the first one, but this time it'd be larger. His goal was to have the Cheetah Men become like the Ninja Turtles. You see, Daedalus tried to kill his nephew out of jealousy. Daedalus threw him off a cliff, only to have Athena save him by turning the boy into a partridge. Now Vince wasn't going to throw some cartoon turtles off of a cliff. He could surely emulate them. The show started in the comic? Well, he had a comic commissioned. A 16-page story detailing some of the lore of the Cheetah Men. At the end, though, were some mock-ups of action figures. Not just plastic action figures, but also hard rubber dolls. I mean, why not at this point? And they were very serious about this. The company Toy Tech International was actually set up before Action 52 hit market. Cheetah Men shirts are probably the most saying thing here. On the company sheets they handed out were even more details. A cartoon with Disney-quality animation was planned. For a franchise that hadn't even started, with a comic that was still being pitched, based on a game in a warehouse, this seemed like a huge ask. But I don't know the people Vince knew. Honestly, it's hard to tell what was strange and what wasn't from here on out. Vince details something he called a costume live figure that would show up at trade shows. He said it was being designed by the people that did effects on Beetlejuice, Big Trouble in Little China, and Predator. But I feel like this was never official. That if you told the effects artists about this suit, they'd be as confused as I am right now. These aren't the only projects that never saw light of day. The Super Nintendo version of Action 52 never materialized. Why did the Sega version get made but the Super Nintendo didn't? The carts cost less. It was that simple. A game called Sports 5 got cancelled too. No one really knows what this game was supposed to be. But I think it's safe to assume Sports 5 was going to be 5 sports games in one. We didn't even cover Cheetah Men 3 here because, we don't technically have Cheetah Men 2 yet. One thing on this list though that my brain refused to believe on a technical level was the Action Game Master. The Action Game Master was a handheld device that Vince said was coming in 1993. This device, according to the marketing materials that I can assure you are not faked because they actually appeared on their CES display, made some wild claims. They said it would play NES, Super Nintendo, and Genesis games. Just for comparison, Nintendo and Sega were currently working with the Game Boy and Game Gear respectively. Neither of these would play anything close to the games that complex. Hell, Vince also said read CD-ROMs. That would beat the Sony Discman by an entire year. Is that not enough? You could also have a TV tuner so you can watch shows. See how well they display on that 3.2-inch screen. This handheld would be roughly 16 inches wide and 12 inches tall. Sadly though, it'd never see the light of day, and we never got an estimated cost. Probably a lot though. At this point I'm not sure if he's just unaware of how impossible this is, because I don't think there's anything sinister behind it. He's been the man tossing ideas at the wall for a while now. That's because Vince never planned for failure. It wasn't a part of who he was. Why would he though? This franchise was a sure thing. He was 100% behind the Cheetah Men, Action 52, and all the other spin-offs he planned. After all, why would he ever think his creation would fail? How could wax wings ever melt? By the end of '93 it was over. Active Enterprise was out of the gaming market. Vince tried and tried, but it wasn't meant to be. Before the end of the year, Vince would sell his company, and they'd be merged with Voice Technologies. This is a company that specialized in voice control technologies. A very literal company. Vince was a founding member of Active Enterprises. He was the only person remaining with any connection to Action 52. The programmers were long gone. Any open projects were cancelled. So that was it. By 1994, he was done. He finally left Active Enterprises. The game still would be sold for a while longer, though. The oldest ad I could find was from December 1994 issue of Electronic Gaming Monthly. After Vince left, GamePro magazine would finally do their review on the Genesis version of Action 52. It was a little late, but it received a full-page spread. The controls are the worst. Action 52 has a low-quality feel. They called it a has-been. After Icarus died and Daedalus buried his son, it said there was only one sound. The sound of a partridge laughing at him in his pain. There wasn't anyone that Vince killed, but the message stayed the same. One last chuckle from the universe. A final kick walking out the door. From this point forward, Vince vanished. Somehow even more than before. You know why I keep using this photo of him? It's the only public photo that exists. He did pop back up though. The latest I could find of him resurfacing was in August of 1996. He was trying to get a Usenet mailing list to sell blank CDs. Some people said they received emails from him December of that year, that he was trying to sell CDRs and writers. It may have been automated though. I'm just glad he found his way to that mailing list. Vincent D. Perry would pass away March 6th of 2012 in Miami, Florida. He was 69 years old, a few weeks from his 70th birthday. We don't publicly have an entire picture of his life. All we have is roughly 4 years at best. What a 4 years those were though. A group of developers made one of the most infamous games in existence. This was pivoted to another console. An entire media empire was planned. Sequels made. Then the company was sold. What a ride. Other people had tried to retell this fable in the modern age. In the 2010s, someone else bought the rights to the Cheetah Men. They did a Kickstarter for a version called Cheetah Men 2: The Lost Levels. They also had products that wouldn't see the light of day. An iPhone version called iCheetah. It's coming out 11/12/13, and he expects 50 million downloads on day one. There's also an Ouya game coming soon. Playing games that never come out was a faithful retelling, but didn't have the soul of the original. To be honest, I don't think anything else could. Let me tell you, this may not be a perfect recollection of the events. It's nearly a 40-year-old story, using 20-year-old testimony on sources that vanished 10 years ago. I'm showing up and chasing memories of memories, trying to piece together the narrative. This is just a detective going over old case files now, looking for a detail they missed. Something out of place. Unaccounted for. Something they overlooked at the crime scene. The statute of limitations lapsed a long time ago, but he just needs to know. Albert said, "Memories are not infallible, and bits will disappear only to return slightly different years later." Ain't that the truth? In the end, we knew where it went wrong because it went wrong everywhere. What's truly bizarre, though, is that they did accomplish their goal. Mario himself said anything less awful than what it was may have just quietly faded away into time. This is true. No one remembers the mediocre. People remember a spectacle. That's what Action 52 became. There are dozens of videos dedicated to this game, podcasts discussing its creation, websites well over 20 years old dedicated to its details. So in creating this game, it became more than any of them could have ever dreamed. It actually became legendary. Hey, if you're still here, thank you very much for watching. It's taken a while for me to make this video. I got a long list of more videos I want to make that just take a lot of time and research. I'd really like to thank Albert though. He's currently working on the One Player podcast, so feel free to check that out. Thank you, have a great day.